Today, I want to talk about the weather out here in the high desert. This has got to be the harshest environment that I personally have ever lived in. So this week, I'd like to go into detail about some of the harsh weather that we experience out here and talk a little bit about what we do to make sure that we're prepared for that weather and how we kind of handle it when things get crazy. It's a lot of different types of weather. We get a huge range of things, and a lot of it we didn't really expect before we came out here. You know, we knew that it was going to be dry and hot, but we didn't expect a lot of the other things that we've experienced over the past year. So as I am shooting this video, it is now springtime, and we have learned that spring in the high desert of New Mexico is synonymous with extreme wind. We did not expect this coming out here. For some reason, I didn't even think twice about how windy it was going to be. But after spending last spring out here and now this spring, we've noticed that it just gets super windy pretty much the entire duration of spring. March, April, May, and even into June last year. We're talking every single day, 15 to 20 mile an hour winds at a minimum. And then most days you'll get gusts up to 30, 40, even sometimes 50 miles an hour. This afternoon we had 50 mile an hour wind gusts coming through here. It has calmed down a little bit this evening, which is nice, but it's pretty much just always really windy. And we've learned to work around that. We've learned to just sort of try to plan our days and just do the best that we can to get projects done outside, but definitely makes things a little bit difficult to, be working with like plywood, for example, outside when you have 50 mile an hour winds. It gets pretty uncomfortable. Some other complications of the wind include dust getting kicked up. It gets really dusty out here in the spring, and then a lot of the time that dust finds its way like into our living spaces. Like we'll just like have like coats of dust. Like I don't know if you can see that on camera, but there's like all over my finger there just from doing that. Dust gets on everything inside, so we're constantly having to like be very diligent about cleaning the interior of the tiny house and the cabin. We actually keep like sheets over like the mattress in the tiny house just to keep dust from getting all in there, so that it's easier to just kind of pull it out and shake it out outside. And then I'm constantly like cleaning my laptop off or anything that we leave out overnight, trying to keep dust from getting in there. My camera gear as well. I have never cleaned my lenses as often as I do out here in the high desert. And then another complication of all this wind is that it becomes wildfire season at the time of me recording this video. Fortunately, we do not have any fires. It's still pretty early in the season, but as you guys see it and then into the future, I assume we will get at least a couple in the area. We had a few last year. We did learn a lot about like tracking the wildfires, though. We were constantly keeping an eye on it and any evacuation notices. Fortunately, last year, none of those fires really got too close to us, but we could see them every night raging in the distance in the mountains in the north. So hopefully this year is better. It was definitely a wetter year, so maybe it will be, fingers crossed. But that's just another complication of being out here in the spring. Moving right along to harsh weather type number 2. This is another one that we did not expect at all, completely caught us off guard. It rains a ton out here in the high desert. Like we thought we were moving to a desert where it's dry and they get very little annual precipitation and rainfall, but as it turns out, there is this thing out here in New Mexico called the monsoon season, and basically from June through September, it just rains all the time. It's very similar to being like in the southeast, if anyone has ever been to Florida in the summertime, or New Orleans, where you'll have these cumulonimbus clouds just like rising up slowly, and then in the afternoon they'll open up and it'll just start pouring. And last year, during the monsoon season, it basically rained every single day. I mean, it was constant. To be fair, it was a very active monsoon last year, one of the wetter ones that they've had in a really long time. I assume this year won't be the same, but who knows? Either way, it surprised the crap out of us. We had absolutely no idea that that was going to happen out here in the desert. Really, the only thing that we can do, though, is just sort of plan around it, similar to the wind. I would get out here in the mornings, work before that rain started to develop in the atmosphere, and in the afternoon, it would be time to go inside and try to do something else, try to get out of the rain. So harsh weather type number 3 is something that we actually did expect, and that is heat out here in the desert. But realistically, though, it doesn't get that hot. We are at about 6,600 feet. You know, we'll have definitely quite a few days where it gets up to about 100, maybe 102 degrees Fahrenheit as the high. That was in July last year. There's about a 2-week stretch where it's really, really difficult, and it doesn't really even cool down at night, and it's just really hard to stay cool. I did make a video about that, and I'm sure I'll do another one as an update on some more things that we've learned to deal with it. We definitely have learned a lot of ways to handle those hot summer days out here, and everything from just how we manage the temperature inside our spaces in the tiny house and in the cabin to just, you know, simple things like sticking ice packs on the back of our neck and stuff just to try to cool down, taking a cold shower in the evening, whatever it may be. But that is something that we did expect a little bit more, but it hasn't actually been as bad as we thought. Moving right along to point number 4, though, is cold. It gets cold out here. It gets a lot colder than we actually ever thought, to the point where it actually snows for a good portion of the wintertime. And even this year, we had snow into April a couple of different times. So, you know, that's something that we didn't expect, is that it just gets really snowy. And you know, I know I made a whole video about that very recently. I'll put a link in the description below if anyone wants to check that one out. But that's just another thing. You know, we've learned how to keep the space warm using propane heaters, but then also using the wood stove, something that Shannon and I didn't really have a ton of experience with before getting out here. Simple things like just how to make a fire the most efficient way and keep things as warm as possible, making sure that we have wood ready, stacked, nice and dry, so that we can just get it in there when we need it for when temperatures get really cold. And, you know, what's interesting about the high desert, or really any desert, is that temperature just fluctuates very dramatically throughout the day. I mean, springtime, in the fall even, you could have temperatures up into the 80s or even 90 degrees Fahrenheit during the day, and then at night it'll drop down like into the 50s sometimes, and it'll be a lot cooler. So you'll see those like 40 or 50 degree temperature swings in a day. I guess overall, though, in terms of temperature specifically, it's relatively mild out here most of the year. In the spring, most of the summer, even into the fall, pretty comfortable for the most part. You know, the wind, the rain, the unpredictable snow events, the mud that comes along with that, you know, that moisture, and then the dryness that comes along with the wind, those are things that are more challenging to deal with. But when it comes to strictly temperature, it's relatively manageable. You know, when it gets really cold, even on the coldest of days, as long as we're prepared with a couple of heat sources, we can keep things warm. And the same applies on the other end of the spectrum. When it's really hot, it's possible to manage the temperature inside of the tiny house and in the cabin simply by opening a couple of windows and getting some breeze in there. You know, you can cool off most nights. There are some really bad ones, but for the most part, it's doable. You don't have that humidity that you would get, for example, like in the southeast, where it's just super humid and it's basically impossible to cool yourself down. And I guess that kind of brings me to the final point number 5, and this is another thing that we really did not expect too much out here at high elevation. When you're talking 5, 6, 7,000 feet of elevation, the sun does a number on things that are outside. And this is something that we really, like I said, we really were not super aware of. Heck, it can do a number on your body as well. There's higher, you know, instances of skin cancer out here. You know, I'm always wearing, like, I was never a hat guy before I moved out here, but now I find myself always making sure that I have a hat on, covering my face, or wearing sunscreen and stuff, just because it can get kind of dangerous. And that sunlight will also damage, like paint, for example, on the outside of the tiny house, or basically anything that has any kind of plastic in it will get basically destroyed. A good example of that, we pop our hoods for the pack rats out here to deter them from making nests in the engine bays of our vehicles at night. And if we forget to put them back down and they're parked in sunlight, like, that can do a lot of damage to the, you know, the inside of the engine. Anything that is plastic in there, any sort of like plastic pieces and tie downs or whatever, they can get really messed up by that sunlight. So we have to be very diligent about, you know, closing our hoods during the day, popping them at night, or at the very least just parking them in the shade so that the sun is not beating on them all day long. Just another thing that we did not fully expect, but we're constantly having to keep an eye on and trying to maintain throughout the year. Guess that pretty much sums it up for this one. You know, I just kind of wanted to talk a little bit about what we're doing to handle this harsh environment and some of the unpredictable weather that comes along with it. You know, it's really not too bad overall. It just requires a little bit of planning and a little bit of thinking ahead, and, you know, just accepting that we don't have full control over everything out here. It is just kind of part of living off grid in this sort of climate. It's an absolutely beautiful place. I think that just when you're trying to also develop a property like this and you're constantly trying to like work outside, that makes it so that you have to think a little bit more about these weather conditions and obviously plan around them. Can't thank you all enough for watching and for following along on this journey. I'll talk to you guys in the next one.